25 minutes before 11 o'clock. You know, one of the things that I hope that people remember our show for, Robin, is the fact that we respected people who disagreed with us. Mm-hmm. I hope that, you know, after we're done, we've been doing this now 15 years, I hope that they say, and I'm not saying believe it, I'm just saying, although you never know, right? But I've thought this all my life. And you know where it comes from? I'm from a big family, you know, and so when you're from a big family, and I know you know this too, even though your family's not that big.
No, it's not.
You have people in your family who have completely opposite political views as you, and yet you're not at each other's throat. And you know why? Because you respect that person. I know what happens for me. I have a brother who's... I'm not, you know, it's not 100% that we disagree, of course, but some things, you know, we disagree on. So I always think, okay, well, he's intelligent. Maybe I'm the one missing something. And I always hope that somebody who disagrees with me thinks about me that way. I hope they don't say, what an idiot, he disagrees with me, you know? But that seems to be the way we are in today's world. And I am going to tell you that I think a lot of that comes from people in this business. A lot of people who do talk shows decide, for what reason, I don't know, that they are going to hold on to their opinion and not even listen to another opinion. And it's not just radio. I hear it on the TV talk shows as well. In John Kennedy's presidency, there was an event that happened, and I only learned about it through the book that we're going to talk about, written by Joseph A. Esposito. He's on the phone right now, and wait till you hear about this. This was a marvelous thing. This just shows you how important it is, I guess. I don't know what word to use there. To be able to listen to people you disagree with, and even listen to people who have artistic views, not just political, but artistic views that may be different from yourself. The best way to introduce Joseph Esposito, I can tell you a couple of credentials. He served in 3 presidential administrations. He is at the United States Department of Education for a while. He's an adjunct professor at Northern Virginia Community College. It goes on and on. The best way to introduce you, though, is to just, can I just read? I never do this. I just want to read the inside flap because there's a lot of name dropping in here, and it's intentional and it's good. It's positive name dropping. Here's what it says on the inside flap of the book titled Dinner in Camelot. In April 1962, President and Mrs. John F. Kennedy hosted 49 Nobel Prize winners, along with many other prominent scientists, artists, and writers, at a famed White House dinner. Among the guests were J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was officially welcomed back to Washington after a stint in the political wilderness, Linus Pauling, who had picketed the White House that very afternoon, William and Rose Styron, who began a 50-year friendship with the Kennedy family that night, James Baldwin, who would later discuss civil rights with Attorney General Robert Kennedy, Mary Welsh Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's widow, who sat next to the president and grilled him on Cuban policy, John Glenn, of course, you know, who had recently orbited the Earth aboard Friendship 7, historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., who argued with Ava Pauling at dinner. This is almost like a movie, right? And many others. Actor Frederick March gave a public recitation after the meal, including some unpublished works of Hemingway's that later became part of Islands in the Stream. And it goes on from there. It's an honor to be able to say good morning and hello to Joseph A. Esposito. Good morning, Joseph. Thank you for being on the air with us today.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you.
I love the fact that all of these people were together and they didn't all agree, but yet it was not disagreeable.
That's correct. It was a special time. It was a time much different from today.
Yeah, and I don't know why today can't be like that. Was it unique for its time, or did we see this all over the country? Did we see people disagreeing and still being civil with each other?
Well, I think there was a time when politics was more civil. I mean, certainly partisanship was there, and that was an important part of the process, of the democratic process. But we also respected people, and we also had a understanding that there was a certain sense of the common good. And for foreign policy, for instance, there was the old saying that partisanship stops at the water's edge. And I think one of the great things about this dinner was the acknowledgement that there was an important aspect to in respecting the achievements of these people who were tremendous intellects, science scholars, who had accomplished so much in so many different fields, in physics and chemistry and medicine, in literature, and really 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners. These were the greatest intellectuals at mid-century. And what's notable is that there were, first of all, there were 175 people at this dinner, so it was the largest of the Kennedy era. But in addition to the 49 Nobel Prize winners, there were a number of other very distinguished people who certainly belonged in that category. They weren't Nobel laureates, but those people included Styron and Robert Frost, James Baldwin and Catherine Ann Porter and John Dos Passos. John Glenn was there. He had just made his famous orbital flight 2 months earlier. He was the hero of the hour. So there was an understanding that these people, some of these Nobel Prize winners actually were immigrants to America, but there was a recognition that these people had done a great deal for America. Some, for example, had been vitally involved with the Manhattan Project in helping win the war.
Wow. Yeah, and oh wow, it's just so amazing. Now, did the Kennedys invite them for a specific purpose, or what was the whole purpose of the dinner?
At the very outset of the Kennedy administration, there was a desire to honor the arts and literature and really people of intellectual who made intellectual contributions to America. They were given special invitations to the inauguration, and so in the ensuing period, there were various events at the White House, dinners, musical performances. Pablo Casals played there, and others, and this was really just part of that. This extension of really representing, the president was representing not only the office of the presidency and the White House, but was representing the American people.
Yeah,
and one of the things was that Pearl Buck, who was observing this, she was there, of course, and watching as she was watching the president and the First Lady descend the staircase to greet the guests. He actually saw some of these scientists with tears streaming down their eyes, down their cheeks, and it was this kind of recognition that scientists, they're certainly famous in their realm, but they're not. Many of them aren't everyday names, and the idea that the president, the presidency, the White House, the American people would be honoring them at a very special dinner was something that was.
The legacy that President Kennedy left regarding that notion that the arts are important, that part of what you just said, it continues. I am a fan of watching the annual awards in the Kennedy Center, and I can't remember what they call the awards, but it's an honor. It's
the Kennedy Center Honors.
Yeah. It's a weird looking necklace or something. It's an odd looking thing, isn't it? But it's fun to watch. That is true. But I was going to say, what I should say is, it kind of underscores that very thing that must have been just simply a part of his persona.
Yes, I think that's indeed the case. And there's been a lot written about President Kennedy and about the Kennedy administration, but here's an interesting, I think, story that says a lot. Linus Pauling, as you mentioned at the outset, had been picked in the White House, and he had been disappointed that there hadn't been more progress on a stalled nuclear test ban agreement, and he held President Kennedy responsible for that. He'd written a number of letters to the president that were quite strident, and so he's out there. Pauling is out there protesting the day before, and on that day, Sunday, April 29th, 1962. And so he and his wife, Ava Helen Pauling, who was also a peace social activist, they go over to the Willard Hotel in Washington. They change into the evening clothes, go to the White House, and they're going through the reception line. President Kennedy says, I see that you've been around the White House a couple of days already, haven't you? And then he says, before introducing Pauling to Mrs. Kennedy, he says, I hope that you will continue to express your opinions. And I think that President Kennedy had understood that today's adversaries could be tomorrow's allies.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a wonderful thing. I hope you continue to express. Yeah, I love that. I hope that people get from this radio, and this is a small radio show you're talking to. We're not big time in any way, but I hope in this community people tune into us because they know that's how we are. We have people who, I remember when we first took this, if I could just talk about ourselves just for a second here. And for some reason, talk radio had this stigma. I don't know if stigma is the right word, but it had this reputation. It was always going to be one-sided, and in this case, it would have been conservative. They all weren't, but a lot of them were. But the show that Robin and I created wasn't that at all. It was more, I don't know, like a magazine where, you talk to people and you get to understand the position. And it gets me in trouble sometimes because if I don't argue with somebody I disagree with, but instead listen to what they have to say, I'll get called out on it a lot. Mm-hmm. How come you didn't say something? I can't believe you let him say that. Well, I do. I will express it later on. Did the president do that same kind of thing? If somebody was saying something he disagreed with, did he let them say their piece and then give a counter to it, a counter argument to it?
Yes, I think that was generally the case. I mean, every politician gets upset when they're criticized, of course, and but he was interested in governance, and he understood that, again, as I said, that those adversaries could be allies, and the purpose was to achieve a better America. And it was at the height of the Cold War. There was a desire to achieve some sort of consensus, and people were pulling together. It was a great sense of pride in America.
And you had Ethel Kennedy among one of the guests, and she was a different personality than Jackie, but everybody there that attended that night seemed to find joy in each other. There was no animosity.
No, not at all. And again, going back to Linus Pauling, he had been picketing, and then he said he had a fantastic time that night. And in fact, there was no planned dancing for that evening. It was a dinner, and then there was this after dinner literary presentation. But in the right after the dinner, there was a lull, and the Strolling Strings, an Air Force ensemble group, was playing music, and Pauling went into the hallway and started dancing, and he led an impromptu session of dancing. And Jackie Kennedy said to the president, "Look, Jack, they're dancing."
Oh my gosh, what a wonderful painting! The picture you're painting with your words. What is your connection to this story?
Well, my connection is that I met John Kennedy when I was a 10-year-old boy in October of 1960.
Wow.
I spoke with him, got his autograph on the cover of a Saturday Evening Post, which had the drawing of him by Norman Rockwell. And that really sparked a lifelong interest for me in politics, government, and history. Went on to serve in these 3 presidential administrations, and history has been a passion of mine, and I think it had a big impact on me.
Oh, you also give a behind-the-scenes look because creating a party of any magnitude, you have to have a seating chart. You have to make sure that the hosts, like Jack and Jackie Kennedy, were able to float to the different tables, and it seems like she was an expert at that.
She was. She was an excellent hostess. I think that Tish Baldridge, the social secretary, would argue that she learned some of those skills at Miss Porter's school, in her boarding school that they both attended. But but she was a great hostess, and there was certainly a sense of graciousness and glamour. But I will say that one of the people that really impressed me most in doing this research over the last several years was Jackie Kennedy, in terms of her commitment to making the White House a living museum. She established the Office of the White House Curator. She established a Fine Arts Committee. She launched the White House Historical Association. She had a very, very famous documentary tour of the White House on Valentine's Day in 1962, 2 months before this dinner, in which she really unveiled the changes that had taken place there in the White House. She had tracked down artworks, furnishings, pieces that had been in the White House years, in some cases, decades, and even a century before, to make it a return to this era of grandeur. The Blue Room, for instance, where one of the dinner was held in both the State Dining Room and the Blue Room, but the Blue Room was restored to what it was in James Monroe's day, and many of the furnishings there were actually purchased by Monroe. So Jackie Kennedy was very interested in languages and in art history, and there was the glamour, and there was the kind of the social aspect of her role in the White House. But I think she had a certain amount of depth, and I really respected it.
It's interesting to think in terms of John Glenn. I'm thinking, did his time there, perhaps at this dinner, I guess, plant the seeds that led to him wanting to be in government as a senator eventually? I'm wondering if he saw that he could make a difference because of the people he was surrounded by at this moment.
Absolutely, there's no question about that. He forged a relationship with President Kennedy, but more especially with Robert Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy was the one who encouraged him to run for the Senate in Ohio the first time in 1964. He wasn't successful in that particular election, but he went on to a significant career in public service. It was John Glenn who was asked to take Robert Kennedy's children, back from Los Angeles after their father was shot.
Really?
And he was the one who told them that their father.
We're getting the picture that although people disagreed with one another, they were cordial. Is that true for everybody? For example, LBJ and Robert Kennedy, weren't they adversaries?
They were, and of course the acrimony increased year by year. Interestingly, I have no evidence that they really said anything at all to each other that night. They were both there, and they were the only politicians other than the president who were present. But if their acrimony was not on exhibit that night, but there were people that had relationships that were frayed between one another, and they were there. John Dos Passos, for instance, had been a long time close friend of Hemingway. Although Hemingway wasn't there, he had died the year before, but he was honored at the dinner. They had a serious estrangement in the 1930s. Linus Pauling and Robert Oppenheimer were very close friends in the 1920s, and they had a falling out, and it was never quite repaired.
Wow.
How were the guests chosen for the after party?
I think it was a result of who the president and first lady were comfortable with. It was a very select group. There were about a dozen or so. Robert Frost was there. I think John Kennedy was very interested in meeting Styron, and Diana and Lionel Trilling, the literary critic, were there. But it was a small, select group.
The book is called Dinner in Camelot. Our guest is the author, Joseph A. Esposito. Where are you, Joseph? Where are you calling from?
I'm in suburban Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia.
Oh, wow. The night America's greatest scientists, writers, and scholars partied at the Kennedy White House. This is an amazing book, and you've got the phones ringing. I'm just wanting your permission before we go to the calls. Would you be interested in talking to our listeners?
Sure.
Okay. If you want to call in, I'll take the calls I've got already, but if you're not calling in and you don't know the number, it's 622-9622. Good morning. Thank you for calling and for waiting. You're on the air with Joseph Esposito. Hello? Can you hear me? Well, I see the call there, but it's something not working out. When did you think... it's hard to imagine the idea of writing a book that takes place in one night. Was that a challenge?
That wasn't a challenge. The challenge was in the organization of it. How do you tell a story about 177 people?
Yeah.
And all, if not all of them, most of them have a tremendous background and all, almost all worthy of biographies themselves, and have been the subject of biographies.
Right,
So how do you focus on that? So what I did was basically identify a few people who I wanted to emphasize, the people who I thought were had the most interesting stories and relationships, and I basically talked about several tables, the president's table, first lady's table, and then Ethel Kennedy presided over a table in which William Styron and Robert Oppenheimer were at.
You know, it's hard to imagine this because we know the outcome of some of the lives in the book. And it's almost like if you try to imagine yourself at this party, knowing what we know, you would want to whisper to John Kennedy, don't go to Dallas. You know, to Robert Kennedy, don't walk through the kitchen. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, there are certain things that we know. I'm just curious if there's a advertisement. I haven't seen the movie, but there's a movie about the Ted Kennedy accident that killed Mary Jo Kopechne. Are you familiar with that movie?
I'm aware that it's coming out. Yes.
How do you think the Kennedy family is responding to that movie?
Yeah, I really don't know.
No idea. I'm just curious why they even put that movie out now. It seems like it's not really. It doesn't have any information we don't already know. So that's why I was wondering.
It is your book is really amazing because the White House is an icon. The White House itself is a personality surviving all these years, and sometimes we forget what the White House is, but because of that gathering of people that President and Mrs. Kennedy did, that is like a huge reminder for us that it's the coming together of everyone.
Yeah, good point.
It represents the American people, really.
Yeah. I think you might have dropped off. I'm not sure. Joseph, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I have a copy of the book, Dinner in Camelot. If I have a listener who would like it, please call me and I'll leave it for you here at the radio station. I did find it on Amazon. The rest of us will have to go buy it, so either go to Amazon or Joseph, do you have a website you want to recommend?
www.josephaesposito.com.
Okay.
And the book is available everywhere.
Okay. Let me squeeze in a phone call to give away the book. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Hey, good morning. This is Dennis.
Dennis, the book is yours. It'll be waiting for you.
Okay, I'll probably be a week because I'm headed for North Carolina, but can you hold it for a week?
Yeah, we got it. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. See that? He's listening on the internet. How about that? See, the internet makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Joseph Esposito, thank you for being on the air with us today. That was fun.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. We will be right back. This is WOCA Ocala.